Hello, I'm your host, Effie Pilarino, and today I have the pleasure of discussing with David Shrier, who is joining us from London. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Effie. It's great to be here.
Well, I mean, David, you've been wearing a lot of academic hats, but also entrepreneurial hats, and you're a prolific author too. So we have lots to discuss. I remember meeting you in person, and the memories now are more vivid since we don't meet so many people these days. I remember you in Switzerland when you were sharing your book around the frontiers of financial technology, talking about blockchain and digital banking. That was 2016. It was quite futuristic. And today I want to touch upon your latest book, which is Augmenting Your Career, How to Win in the AI era, if you like. And I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to touch upon a lot of topics. For our listeners, David is right now at Imperial College, the professor of practice, AI, and innovation, and also the CEO of ESME Learning, and we'll have the opportunity to hear more about that digital learning innovation initiative. So David, where shall we start? Let's start with your book and the big ideas that are in there. And you know, me being more in fintech, which is becoming broader and broader, right? I really care much more now, as it is clear that fintech has grown up. There's so many job opportunities in fintech. Not only companies are fighting for talent, but also people in the market want to work for fintechs and want to work for the bleeding edge companies in crypto and DeFi and so on. So tell us about the job market and this AI threat and how you think about it.
Absolutely. And this was one of the things that had me decide I needed to sit down and write the book, because I talk to people who they've spent 10 or 15 or 20 years of their career in traditional financial services, and then they see all this disruption happening and they say, okay, I need to reorient myself. I need to reskill. I need to present myself differently and to get new knowledge about this world of fintech, because that's where the future is. And I completely agree with them. I mean, we met when I put together Frontiers of Financial Technology in 2016. That was the textbook for our class at MIT, the first fintech class in the world, particularly that you could take online from a top school. And the book we wrote because there was no textbook. We had to create the textbook just to go along with the class. It helped now 20,000 people reskill in 150 countries. It's still going on today. It's now at University of Oxford at Said Business School. It's called Oxford Fintech. And very dear colleagues, Pinar Ozkan and Nir Volkan have taken it over, but it's the same. The DNA is the same class, which says, okay, I'm a working professional in financial services, and I am seeing all this disruption, including from AI, including from blockchain, and I need to pivot into that. So that was sort of where this all came from, which is, you know, I had people asking me these questions like, what's going to happen next and what do I do about it? And so I wanted to provide some answers. And so I've been messing around with AI since 1991. I think I wrote my first AI program. You know, what's happened is it's gone from a novelty to becoming core business. And so, for example, you know, you've seen Ann Bowden from Starling Bank just came out with her book recently, and that's gotten a lot of uptake, and Starling itself is doing very well. This is an example of a bank that is in a class of these neobanks where it costs 50% less money to build it and requires 90% fewer people, 90% fewer jobs to run these digital neobanks. And what's replacing all those people? AI.
Mm.
So I'm sitting there going, look, we're eliminating 90% of the jobs in the retail and commercial banking industry, for example, through these AI systems. And the jobs that are left are different jobs. It's not the same jobs. It's much higher value, knowledge worker, fintech oriented professionals. So I said, okay, we got to put a book together that explains to people, well, what is this AI stuff? And then how is it impacting careers? And what can you do about it? And there's some other interesting things that we got into once we started exploring that topic.
So are you taking this topic from a social perspective? Are you taking it from a technical sort of engineering, if you like, perspective? And can one sort of break them up, or is this something that we have to look from all these angles?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is the latter. We need a synthetic discipline for thinking about these things, because it's not just one or the other. So my career, and particularly the 8 books that I've put together, are in the sphere of helping people, and even the online classes I do are in the sphere of helping people who have some technical topic that they want to gain an understanding of, or some people who have some technical knowledge they want to convey, and making it accessible to a broader audience so that people can make better decisions. So for example, I'm now putting together a class at Imperial College Business School, which is online, called AI Startups and Innovation, which says, okay, you want to start an AI company. Maybe you are going to get ahead of the curve. You're not going to be replaced by the AI. You're going to be the person who runs the AI business. Well, how do you put one of those kinds of companies together? Because it turns out deep tech companies involve a much different approach to funding and management and growth than, the latest, Instagram app or something. And so that's an important consideration. In order to pull these things off, in order to make a successful AI business, or to reskill yourself as a professional in fintech, you need to bring a bunch of different disciplines together. You need to bring that technical knowledge together. You also need to understand how it plays out in context of business and society. So that was the lens that I took for augmenting your career for the book.
And let's talk about, David, this couple, humans and AI, and of course the narrative, especially through media, is always sort of, we are at war, we are against each other, and basically humans, we have this, we approach AI with a suspicious sort of, if you want, attitude, versus approaching it as, okay, we humans are designing, obviously, these AI algorithms and processes, and it is our choice to bake in our values, and get the best out of it, because we are the designers, we are the ones that are going to be doing the upgrading, we are the ones that will build network effects by, connecting different AIs and so on. How do you see that? What is your sort of, what are you seeing in the market? Is it a cultural issue? And what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're bringing up several really important points, but this was the exciting discovery of thinking about and putting together this book and some of the other work that I'm engaged in, which is people have a perception of it's us versus them, but it turns out that there are certain things that neither the person nor the AI does very well by itself. But if you put them together, they can do things that are just extraordinary. So, for example, predicting the future. So AI and human hybrid systems can very accurately predict the future. And so this was something we put together. We were able to correctly predict the closing price of the S&P 500 a month in advance during an extremely volatile period in the market, because we were using this hybrid intelligence of human and AI. And so that's an exciting field, and that is kind of the conclusion of augmenting your career of the book, which is, the people who are going to win in the future, who are going to win at work, are going to be the people who understand how to engage with AI and get the most out of it and generate this synthetic or hybrid intelligence. But the part and parcel of that, the kind of very close synergy with that concept is the idea that AI needs to reflect our values, our human values, our values as society. It needs to be consciously designed into the system. And if we don't do that, we will end up with AI that does things that we don't want it to. We will have loans, for example, automated credit analytics systems that discriminate against people and get the bank into trouble because they break the law because it's, violating fair lending. We will have AI systems that will engage in illegal stock price manipulation because you can, right? You can actually demonstrate that a particular kind of AI system can artificially pump and dump stocks or crypto tokens or any kind of tradable security through very clever sort of manipulation. And so if we don't put guardrails in place, we're going to end up getting ourselves into a lot of trouble. And so this idea of safe AI or trusted AI is something that I've been spending increasing time on.
Very interesting. I mean, today I was reading about MasterCard putting a 5 million grant, research grant around, ethical AI for credit decision making. And as you said, it doesn't end whether it's in fintech or in the health sector or, so many cases that we can think of. But you think
absolutely, and Ajay Bala and his team at MasterCard in the cyber intelligence division, since they talk about responsible innovation. And so Ajay contributed a book chapter on my next book, which is coming out this spring, about responsible innovation, because they're putting their money where their mouth is. They are one of the largest financial services companies in the world. They affect 850 million lives. And they're very concerned about how AI is used and how the member banks put it into practice and what we can do to have AI better reflect what we want it to do rather than what it decides to do.
And taking the responsibility for these designs, right? And
that's a great point, because the former Facebook executives have been coming out in increasing numbers saying how ashamed they are at helping put these AI algorithms in place that, in the words of one former vice president there, he said, we're destroying the fabric of society through these AI systems, these algorithms. And my contention is that if more people at Facebook had been more sensitized to the consequences of those algorithms they were creating, they would have quit, they would have left their jobs and gone and worked somewhere else, or maybe just they would have stayed there, but they wouldn't have done things the way that they did. But instead, an unrestrained profit motive was allowed to play out, and that caused the irreparable harm to the Western alliance. It caused huge damage to the global economy. And I would even argue that by virtue of enabling Donald Trump to get elected in the US, it prolonged the COVID pandemic, because Trump was so violently against that, safety measures for basic health. And that all can be traced back to the fact that Facebook algorithms were used to influence voters.
And David, I mean, it's inevitable that we are going towards a digital democracy, if you want, reality, whatever that means. And again, there we are going to be designing what it looks like. But since our life is becoming more digital democracy is inevitable, digital participation, participatory processes. And there, what is it all about? AI algorithms that, again, need to bake in values and make sure that we don't have easily, gamified algorithms, right?
Yeah, well, and it's a challenge because, human beings have an irresistible attraction for gamified experiences, right? Our brains are wired to want fun. And when you have a fun experience or a pleasurable experience, you get a little burst of positive neurotransmitters that make you feel good. And so you want more of that. And so Facebook, as an example, hired a bunch of neuroscientists and cognitive science scientists, and then consciously engineered their algorithmic experience to neuroprogram you, to give you those little bursts of serotonin and dopamine that made you be addicted to Facebook and get into an echo chamber of other people who are like-minded. And more broadly, it's illustrative of the dangers of gamified digital democracy, where if it becomes all about the fun, then it lends itself to manipulation very easily.
Yeah, well, this is so. Do you think that this is the responsibility of policymakers, of the private sector, as in, you know, especially the innovative companies that are building, you know, the future of the Googles and so on? Where do we start? Where do we look? And what are you seeing in the market that is hopeful?
Yeah, well, okay, so a few things. First of all, it is everyone's responsibility. And by that, I mean, we can't just rely on policymakers. We certainly just cannot rely on the private sector. We can't rely just on academia. We have to bring multiple stakeholders together around these problems and engage in action to change where things are headed. And so that's a lot of the work that I'm doing at Imperial. We've started something called the Translational AI Lab, whose explicit mission is to do exactly that, to bring together policy and business and academia in solving these kinds of problems around trusted AI. I also am advising the European Parliament's Science and Technology Options Assessment Group, the Science Committee that Eva Kaili chairs. She was just elected as vice president of the European Parliament. Very exciting. We're very, very thrilled for Eva. But she does really important work about how technology changes society, not just in AI, but also in blockchain and other areas. But specifically with AI, she's sponsoring some legislation to put some guardrails in place and to provide some guidelines around how AI can be used responsibly without quashing innovation, without preventing private sector from doing what it needs to do in order to continue to innovate and give us new and exciting things that we want to buy. So so that's very important work and part of the puzzle. I think it is also important that we go upstream and make sure that the AI programmers and the AI business people and the AI entrepreneurs and the compliance, all the people working around this space are all thinking about the broader consequences of what certain decisions mean. It's what they call systems thinking approach. We can't just look at our one piece of the picture. We have to look at the entire system and see how do all these different pieces work together. And so if I'm going to create a new AI commodities trading company, you would think, well, we don't have to worry about ethics. It's just financial trading. But what if that commodities trading company makes money speculating on the price of rice? Now I have the potential to influence the price of rice, which if it goes up too much could cause a lot of poor people to starve because rice is their major foodstuff. So we have to kind of think about these broader consequences of different decisions in the context in which we're using AI.
Yes. You brought me another memory, David, in the 90s when I was on Wall Street and involved in trading in emerging markets in Latin America, and there was a spike in the corn prices. And you know, it was awful for the Mexican, for the people, for their, you know, everyday
you can't have tortillas to eat with, you know. It's and the tragedy of that in particular is that the corn market is already grossly distorted because there's a lot of government subsidy around corn that keeps the price artificially high while also supporting the corn farmers. And so in the US, for example, there's a whole concept known as farm banking, where farmers are paid not to grow crops because their crops are too productive. So growing too much corn, so the ethanol industry buys a bunch of it, which takes it off of the food market, which raises the price of food. So that's happening even without AI. At least there we can track it because it's happening at human speed. The risk of AI systems is that decisions can start to get taken at much faster speeds than humans can catch
and
up with.
hidden,
And
non-transparent.
hidden, absolutely. And so that's what we need to really uncover. We need to create capacity to know that an AI is in the loop, or we need to create systems that require a human to be in the loop. And that way we can help offset some of these challenges or risks.
And obviously we need to get all this systems thinking in our education system early on. So our kids, and maybe, you know, even the kids that are 4 or 5 years old today, have this, you know, really ingrained in their thinking, whereas we have to make an effort and check on this consciously, because we didn't grow up in this world.
Yeah, I mean, ethics, for example, should not be like one day of training once a year that you have to do for compliance purposes, right? And it is possible to instill critical thinking, systems thinking, values of society at an early age. So, for example, the Danish, I think, rather admirably, and some of the Scandinavian companies are embedding critical thinking training into kids as young as 8 or 10 years old, so that if they see an ad, they can ask themselves the question, is this a fake news ad or is this real? You know,
right.
Fake news or is it real news? It turns out you can actually train the human brain to understand if something is fake news, but you have to actually make an effort, because people are, by our nature, we tend to be a little lazy. So Daniel Kahneman talked about this very famously in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. You know, the profound part of your brain that really understands things is kind of asleep part of the time. It's sort of lazy. And the kind of front and center actively engaged part of your brain may not have that same depth perception. And so you need to make sure you activate the lazy but importantly profound part of your brain. And so we can teach people how to do that. We can train people. And in fact, the company that I run, ESME Learning, we're helping people learn faster and better by activating more of their brain. And we're doing that using an AI coaching system. So, you know, I don't just talk about AI or academia. I spun a company. I've spun 4 AI companies out of MIT, and this is the latest one. And we're using MIT research about human machine systems, about AI and the brain, from Professor Sandy Pentland. And we're using it to teach people better and faster about topics like AI and blockchain and fintech and cybersecurity and some other, you know, sort of cutting edge skills needed to advance the financial services professionals of the future.
So is ESME Learning for professionals, or for what ages is it?
Yeah, no, our average student is 40 years old, plus or minus 5 years. That's true for most of our classes, except for blockchain. There, the average age is a decade younger. It's, you know, 30 something plus or minus 5 years. But a lot of our students are working professionals. They frequently, more than half of them have MBAs, or you know, 2/3 of them have MBAs or PhDs. And they're coming back because they need to understand these new technologies that are changing everything about the world around them. We are also helping grad students with a new division that we just stood up called Riff Analytics. But that's not the main core of our business. The core of our business is helping the working professional to better understand how to compete and win in the future of their industries.
So ESME Learning, okay, you get the topic knowledge that you're interested, whether it's blockchain, AI, or whatever, but it's you are using actually methods from training AI algorithms to understand how we humans learn.
No, we're actually using AI. So we partner with the top universities in the world. So we're working with Oxford and MIT and Cambridge and Imperial College. And what we do is we take ideas out of those institutions and turn them into natively digital classes. But when you go through the class, you've got an AI coach that is with you every step of the way, helping you work better with your classmates and ultimately learn better. And so we've published multiple peer-reviewed studies funded by the US National Science Foundation that show that using this technology helps you learn faster and better, and actually even innovate faster and better. So for example, we did an entrepreneurship class on artificial intelligence entrepreneurship, And people who went through the class using our AI coach were 50% more likely to start a company than people going through even a very good in-person accelerator program. So we're taking an entirely online experience and we're delivering you a better career outcome than even you could get if you showed up to a seminar in person.
So David, are you seeing that in a couple of years, if I were working in a company, I would have my personal coach, AI coach?
Yeah, your AI buddy that'll help you do better. I mean, we already have AI assistants, right? We have systems that let you, for example, manage your calendar, your diary without a human assistant. We now are starting to have these editing assistants where I don't know if you've noticed in either Google or Microsoft products, if you start typing, it finishes the sentence for you. It suggests a finish, right? That is another kind of AI assistant that is built off of billions of sentences that they've accumulated in this database, and then contextual awareness around what you're writing and what you might be inclined to say next. I composed a third of my most recent book talking to an AI. So I used my phone to dictate, and it did a pretty good job of transcribing. And then I even wrote, just as an example, I even wrote 2 pages in the book using an AI. So I gave the AI 3 sentences, and then it wrote the next 2 pages. Now, someday, soon perhaps, 3 to 5 years from now, I might become obsolete as a writer because the AI will just be able to write the entire book. That presents some interesting quandaries to all of us, which is why I get back to the idea that just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do something, because ultimately we are building a human society. And so we can decide what we use these AI systems for.
Yes. And there's so many needs that, you know, to better the society, that it's not like we've run out of needs and we're just, you know, playing around, as you said. I mean, I've played around also and wrote an article with AI. I gave it, you know, it was on the topic of super apps in emerging markets. And it was really funny what the AI, you know, came up with. It was pretty good. I'm not sure that people, you know, believed me that I used the AI to do it. And I'm like, okay.
GPT-3 is the system I use, the OpenAI, and that Elon Musk backed that company. And, you know, it is very comparable to what a human writer would write. So I remember that the first sort of commercial use of this AI to write things was back in the late 90s, early aughts, when they started automating earnings releases. So instead of having a human reporter type up the little 1 page of description of the earnings release, they just created a bot to do it. And now that's all earnings release. Anything you read on Reuters or Yahoo Finance or Bloomberg that's telling you about a company's earnings release was written by a bot, not a person. And so now they're sort of working their way up the value chain higher and higher to different kinds of articles and different topics because the AIs are getting better. And so we can do that. And there's a strong profit imperative to do that. But we now have to ask the question, should we do that? Or if there is an article that's written by an AI, should it have a disclosure that it was written by an AI and not by a person? And would someone be willing to pay the same amount of money for that subscription news service if they knew that there were no human reporters, that was all AI systems? So we get into some really interesting questions that, again, cross over technology, policy, business model, commerce, and career when we really think through what we're doing with AI.
So really, we have a great responsibility here. And what I'm hearing from you is that we need to be awake every single moment, because naturally we aren't really awake, right? We're immersed in this the digital hybrid life, and we need to be more awake as to what we are consuming and what we are designing and what we are facilitating to design indirectly through our investments, through our support, through whatever, right?
Absolutely.
So David, before we close, Of course, I will share with our audience the links to all your books, and I hope that we see each other at a physical event. It would be very nice. But let me ask you something. What books are you reading that are not your books right now?
Now that is a very good question. I have a long list that I keep adding to because I haven't had time to sit down. But probably the next one that I'm gonna start peeling off the list is called The Secret Lives of Customers.
Okay.
Because all too often people start companies or they create products or what have you, and it's because they came up with a cool technology, not because they were solving a problem that customers wanted solved. And so understanding people in situ, understanding the people that you're serving with your business is incredibly important. And so I'm looking forward to The Secret Lives of Customers. But my book, Augmenting Your Career, How to Win at Work in the Age of AI, is available now on Amazon and in other book purveyors in Kindle format, audiobook, and print. And all my books you can find it at davidshrier.com/books. So as they come out, you can see my back catalog too.
Thank you so much, David, for being with us and taking the time.
Great, thank you.